Welcome to episode 13 of the Speed Secrets podcast with today's guest, Mike O'Neill. Topics this week include getting into flow, managing focus, performing at your peak, and office furniture, huh?
Welcome to the Speed Secrets podcast. Join Ross Bentley and guests, drivers, instructors, and coaches, engineers, officials, and others for conversations about high performance and race driving. Listen for tips and advice, thought-provoking ideas, and inspiration to take your own driving to the next level. Green, green, green!
Hi everyone, welcome to the show. Are you ready to get into flow or the zone? Because today's guest is Mike O'Neill, and I'm actually just going to read this because I think it's so cool. It's such a great intro, and here's what it says. Dr. Mike leads workplace research at Hayworth, a global office furniture manufacturer based in Holland, Michigan. The research provides a global perspective and practical insights on how the design of workspace affects people's health and work performance. Early on, Mike worked in design consulting. He then became a professor of interior design and industrial engineering at the University of Wisconsin. Since then, he has led research efforts in the office furniture industry. His educational background includes degrees in psychology and architecture. He has written numerous articles and 2 books about how the design of office space affects work performance. On the personal side, Mike holds a private pilot's license and a competition racing license through Midwest Council. He races a 1974 Porsche in the vintage historic class at tracks including Road America, Blackhawk Farms, and Gingerman, and is also a nationally certified DE instructor through the Porsche Club of America. Thanks for joining us, Mike. Welcome.
Oh, thanks, Ross. It's great to be on your show.
This is, it's just cool. Industrial design, interior design, engineering, office furniture, psychology, architecture. What the heck does that have to do with driving cars around racetracks quickly?
Yes. Well, it does seem like it might be a stretch at first, except that the core of my whole research life has been around trying to understand the interaction between somebody's physical environment and their performance or their health or a variety of other types of outcomes. And so whether that's an office cubicle or a healthcare space or a higher education learning environment, we're always surrounded by some sort of a physical entity. We are physical beings. And so if you think about racing or race cars, that too, in many respects, is an office type space. It's a rolling office where very high demand, high performance work is required.
So it comes down to the seat, right? Oh well, and more than that, obviously, but yeah. So the cockpit of the car is the workspace.
Right, exactly. I kind of have fun thinking about that idea because, in the office world, we have cubicles, we have a wide variety of different types of spaces that people are using now. And when I go out to my garage and I look in my race car and I think about that, well, this is yet another place where very demanding work has to occur. And different sets of tools are being used, but all the same, it's kind of compelling to think about. And actually, my amateur racing career in vintage historic has sort of inspired me. It has actually inspired some of the research that I'm leading at Hayworth today.
So I guess quickly, the obvious question is, what kind of seat do you have in your 74 Porsche?
It is a Momo.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Actually, that reminds me, it actually expires this year, so I got one more year. So then I'll have to buy a new seat.
Oh darn, yeah.
Right.
74 Porsche, that's a pretty cool car. I love those early Porsches. They're so light, nimble, fun to toss around, right?
Yes, they really, really are.
Yeah.
And that's another thing. I guess because of my design background, I have the psychology, the cognitive psychology, and the design background. And when I think of Porsche as a mark and those early cars that give you such a visceral driving experience, you're so connected. And it was a mechanical world then, wasn't it? No electronics.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes, you get into a brand new or a newer car and you're kind of like, just get rid of all this stuff. And yeah. But at the same time, well, it just depends on what you want, I guess, right?
Right, absolutely.
I think the newer Porsches are a little bit quicker, maybe.
Yeah, just a little.
Yeah.
It wouldn't surprise me if a Toyota could be probably faster in some ways, right? Or certainly have more horsepower.
Actually, that's a whole other interesting conversation. But I often think about that in that, you take a Ferrari, like the supercar from, I don't know, the 70s or something like that, and you put it up against a modern Honda Civic, and I'm not sure I might vote on the Honda Civic. So.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it?
Yeah. Let's talk briefly about how you and I met. And I don't know, do you want to tell a story? Do you want me to tell a story here?
Why don't you start? I want to hear what you have to say, and I'll add in.
Okay, well, so randomly this strange guy sends me an email out of the blue and says, let's talk about focus and let's talk about flow. And I think we talked about a few different things, but eventually you invited me to come and speak at a, what was that? Like basically a research design meeting, and to talk about my experiences of getting into flow using focus in motorsport. And then what was cool for me was the experience of seeing your researchers, your designers, your product, I can't remember their exact title, but they're kind of the product people, take those things and some of those ideas and some of the research that you've been working on and take that and come up with these just absolutely cool ideas. And, I wasn't there to see what their final design is, but one day I'm going to be sitting in a chair going, I know where this came from.
Right. That was very exciting to be able to. So Ross, I mean, you and I have talked about this. I've had your book, Ultimate Speed Secrets, at my bedstand for years, and it's been such a font of helpful information for me. And so here I am. I'm looking at high performance work, and we have a lab. We built a lab just this last year at Hayworth to study people's work performance in a more controlled environment. So that's all great. And then for some reason, so I'm reading Ultimate Speed Secrets, and obviously there's a lot in there on, well, my gosh, it's all about human performance.
Yeah.
Not only is it about human performance and decision making and all kinds of things like that, behavioral traits and things like that. Well, you could take your book and put a different cover on it. You could be, in some ways, a little facetiously, but you could be talking about any sort of knowledge work. And especially the parts that you have in there on focus and being in flow and things like that. And those are exactly the sorts of things that I'm interested in. And so when I was starting to try to formulate a research project around focus or flow, there's a tremendous amount of literature on it. It's not a new idea, been out there for 40, 50 years. But more and more, you read about it in terms of athletics, high-performing athletes, these snowboarders who can do these crazy stunts in the middle of the air 30 feet above the ground and somehow do it, without falling and getting hurt. And I started to think about, how can I study focus and flow in our more mundane work environments, the world of cubicles, offices, and things like that. And the problem for me was I couldn't figure out a way to give people a high enough workload and cognitive demand that I could measure the difference, any potential difference, by trying different design interventions. And so I was struggling with that. And then one day after a race, particularly successful race, I was thinking about my performance and thinking about how I was in flow for a little part of that race, but I was certainly focusing, if not anything else. And I thought, wait a minute, maybe we should be giving people maybe we could wire up race car drivers and look at that as a high demand cognitive workload task that's knowledge work, definitely. But you can also fairly easily measure someone's performance. How fast did they go? What were their lap times? How did they place in the race? So it's knowledge work, but it's relatively easy to measure. And also because of the high stress, high workload conditions, the effects of the physical workspace would be more evident. Well, it's not really very practical to probably, at this point anyway, to wire up a driver in the way that we would need to do. So then I went on the quest to build a racing simulator. It was a great excuse to build a racing simulator.
I was just going to say it had nothing to do with your own personal interest, right?
No, purely scientific.
Right.
Right. So I built a racing simulator, and I got connected to that community and had some friends into it, and they helped me build a simulator. And what I realized we could probably do would be to use the analogy of racing and a racing simulator, which makes it easier to wire people up to do an EEG and some other sorts of metrics, and be able to understand then what we really wanted to do is understand how do people get into focus and how do they regain it when they lose it, and can we take that and extrapolate that back into the office environment? I mean, that's really it in a nutshell. So that's what we've begun to do in that lab.
How much of that can you share? I mean, what have you been able to take people, I guess, non-racing people, put them in a driving simulator and see some of that? I guess see the stress levels rise, and then see how they've been able to then turn that around and be able to use that to help them perform better.
Yeah, actually, to be honest, Ross, we are just beginning that program right now.
Yeah.
We have been, as you know, we have been setting the lab up and have some fairly complicated equipment, and we've been calibrating that equipment with some other sorts of more traditional sort of cognitive testing.
Right.
So that we're actually now this spring, we'll begin to actually put people, but we probably are not going to use race car drivers. Actually, we decided that driving itself, anybody, most adults know how to drive. And so we thought we'll probably put people in the simulator and just have them do regular driving tasks. And we'll ask them to maintain a certain lap time or a certain speed or something like that. And then introduce some different stimulation, for instance, a noise distraction or some sort of other visual distraction, and then watch what happens to them.
It's interesting because I've coached people on simulators before, and one of the things I love to do is while they're driving, I'll walk up and just kind of give them a good nudge in the shoulder, and see what impact that has on the driver in terms of their focus. I mean, are they able to, do they kind of like just immediately crash the car, or do they kind of just, quickly glance away and keep going? I think we've spent a lot of time talking about the whole thing around focus in that, drivers are always like, well, I need to be better at maintaining focus. Well, actually what you need to do is just get better at regaining focus. Because if you regain it fast enough, it's almost like you haven't lost it, right?
Right. That's a good point. I think you're right. I think that when people you have to assume you're going to lose focus. There's no way during the entire duration of a race. I don't believe there's any way you're never going to lose it. Nobody could do that.
And I think, the second you let go of that whole notion that, I got to maintain focus, I have to maintain focus, no, you don't. Just the second you kind of let go of that, it's almost easier. Well, it is easier to maintain focus, and you're that much quicker to regain it again. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I have a question for you, because I've been thinking about this focus and flow. Because at the same time we're beginning this lab work, we've had an ongoing global study looking at focus and flow. And we have 8 different locations around the world, and many thousands of people have participated in this study. And we have asked people to rate various features of their physical work environment, the technology environment, the lighting, the amount of enclosure they have, all kinds of things like that. And we also ask people to rate their physical stress symptoms and even things like creativity and performance and well-being, their engagement levels, things like that. And consistently, everywhere from Shanghai to Los Angeles and everywhere in between in the world, we have consistently found that people's ability to attain focus and flow had a direct impact on things like stress levels and performance and creativity, all in a positive way. And the other thing that was interesting to me is that it suggests to me that the notion of focus and flow is a very fundamental human thing, and its effects are fundamental and common to all people, regardless of culture and language, because when we controlled for location and culture and things like that and language, these effects were true. So it isn't like a cultural thing, like, right, in the US, we're so hardworking that focus is important, and in some other cultures it isn't. It is a fundamental human truth, the need for focus.
Can you get into flow without focus?
Well, I can't answer that question, but I do know that in our study, when we did the predictive and analytics on it, focus was always a precursor to flow.
And then I guess the question is, well, what is focus?
Right.
And again, kind of specifically to driving a car, I mean, is it, being hyper-focused on just that one line that's in front of you in the car, or what,
Right. Well, here's what I think. In terms of driving, I think, so focus itself as a cognitive act is an act that requires conscious effort. And I think most people would say that flow, by definition, is something that lets you focus, but there is no conscious effort. There's no thinking, okay. And I think that in terms of driving, and this was going to lead to my question to you, in terms of driving, I think that beginning drivers put a lot of pressure on themselves to focus. They're hyper-focused. And then they do things like they keep their eyes down and they stare into the next apex. Mm-hmm. Or they, whatever, right? They focus on, to your point, one element or the other. But I think a classic mistake is like you keep your eyes down and you stare at that next apex. Well, by the time you go to that apex, right, you should be looking at the next apex after that.
Right.
Right? So then you run into problems. And it's not until you sort of get control over that and get your eyes up and focus in a different sort of way where you're taking everything in at the same time, but not getting obsessed with one element of your situation. That's when you start to see success.
And to me, flow is this, it's, I like to use the word magical because it is such a wonderful experience, and yet it's not magical. It's a real thing, but it's that perfect balance between trusting your subconscious to go and do things and consciously being aware of the things you need to, and it's that balance between being hyper focused and scatterbrained. And the cool thing is, I think, is for years, flow or getting in the zone, whatever you want to call it, I think is, it's not like people only started to get into flow in the past few decades. I mean, probably,
right.
There was somebody coming out of a caveman would walk out and he would get into flow every now and then when he was hunting a whatever, right? The difference is in the last few decades, we've been able to kind of, codify it, figure it out, measure it. We're at the point now where, through measuring brainwave activity using the EEG, looking at heart rates, perspiration rate, all these different tools, we can look at that and we can tell when people are more likely or there are more inflow. So then it's once you can measure it, then you turn that around and use that as a tool to help you to train yourself to get there? Because it's like anything. Once you have a model of, or what you're achieving or trying to achieve, it's a whole lot easier to achieve it, right?
Right. Yeah, I would say that would be the holy grail of if you could train yourself to instantly get into flow. And I believe there are certain people who supposedly can do that. People who can get into these meditative states almost at will very quickly. And I also think flow, the other kind of from my background of being a pilot and having some background in situational awareness and crew cockpit coordination and things like that, I also think that when a group of people is in a high state of performance, that there's some sort of flow going on that jumps outside of your own brain, and suddenly you're one mind. Not to sound too zen on you, but
No, I agree 100% in that, and I think anybody who has been in a team environment, or spent a lot of time in a team environment, they know when, man, the team was just on, and at other times when it wasn't, and it also just leads to that whole thing around, which is getting a little zone or zen and woo woo kind of stuff, but it's like, I'm sure everybody has been in a group situation. Somebody walks in and it's like they suck the energy out of the group, or somebody comes in and there's all of a sudden like, wow, the whole group just got more energized. So that whole group energy thing and group flow thing is just, obviously that applies to race teams and, well, other things as well. Although in my world, all that matters is going faster on track. So.
And there's a lot to that. Quite a lot to that. Yeah. So I've got a question. It's just sort of I really am curious what you think. So is flow, if you're a race car driver or a competitive driver, and you get into a state of flow, can that be dangerous?
Wow.
Let me tell you why what I'm thinking, because I know I just threw that into you. So sometimes I think the few times that I feel like I've been in flow, I got on a racetrack in a racing event. For just a moment there, I got so relaxed because the flow was happening that I started to think about other things. So maybe that was me coming out of flow, but it was not a good thing.
So I guess by my definition of flow, you weren't in flow at that moment in time.
Okay.
So, for sure, I think we go through, as drivers, I think we go through that period where we get to that very relaxed state and we're just trusting, as I say, our mental programming to do what we need to do, and we're just operating almost on autopilot. But to me, there's I think we kind of go from the very conscious thinking at things, we get to that level, and then, often we sort of come back out of it and almost to the point of, like you said, then you're thinking about, well, where we're going for dinner tonight. And you're right. I mean, that's potentially dangerous, but that's, I think it's the in-between part that you're really in flow.
Okay. Yeah, now that you say that, I agree. That by definition, if I'm starting to think about other things, that I'm coming out of flow.
When I talk to drivers, I'll say, describe what it was like when you were in the zone or in flow in the past. And one of the things that they, always gets mentioned is in the moment. And again, it sounds all very Zen-like and everything, but, really all that really means is you're focused on what's going on right now. You're not thinking about what's going to happen when I pull into the pits at the end of this session or race. You're not thinking about, geez, did I tighten that bolt to tighten my wheel lug nuts beforehand? You're thinking about, all your focus is on the right now. And I think you can be focused ahead in terms of in a strategic kind of way, like, 2 laps from now, I need to be, I'm going to be catching that car in front of me, and I need to start thinking about setting up a pass. So from a strategic perspective, but that's really being in the moment still, I think. So again, that's, I guess my definition of flow is, originally was, I talked to a lot of drivers and said, what's it like? And I compared it to what I had felt. And then I went and read, I read the famous book Flow by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. Is that right?
Wow, you get an award for pronouncing that right.
Yeah. But, and then kind of looked at all the research and everything and kind of went backwards, I guess, that way. And I think it lines up with a in the moment kind of deal. So, I guess to answer your question, no, I don't think it's dangerous being in flow.
Okay. So, but the potential real danger is that get falling out of flow and being a second behind and not realizing it for just a moment.
I think that's really interesting. In one of the great stories about being in the zone is Ayrton Senna, in the, what was that, 1993 or 2 or 1 or something. No, 1988 Monaco Grand Prix, where he and Alain Prost were teammates, and he qualified, what was it, 1.4 seconds faster than Prost, a world champion, multiple-time world champion, in essentially the same car. And he talked about being like in this tunnel, absolutely in the zone. And he talked about actually being scared as he came out of it because it was just such a deep thing to him. And, maybe that's the potential danger, maybe thinking about it is if you've spent a little time in it, as you come out of flow, is there a moment where you're too relaxed? I don't know.
It's just something to ponder, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's probably perfectly safe if you're at home and you're doing yoga. But, if you're going 160 miles an hour and you should be braking for the first, setting up your braking zone, you probably don't want to have that moment to have 1 second of time when you're not absolutely, back in it. Your mind isn't back.
So I'm curious, you've done all this research on this and talked to a lot of people and worked in different areas around flow and focus. Have you been able to take that knowledge and experience and use it in a way that helps you get into flow more often when you're driving?
Yes. So here's what I found. Obviously, so we've been talking, Ross, you and I today a lot about this whole conversation's been about focus and flow. And I'm thinking about that in terms of racing as well as work environments, more traditional office environments. So one of the things we did in our research was we tried to understand, what are the physical design features or ambient features that help people maintain focus or achieve focus? Because that's very important for us to know. And there were 2 things that came up over and over again anywhere in the world, no matter where our sample was coming from. And I'll explain what these are. The first was legibility, and the second was noise. So,
well, it's not noisy in a car.
No, that's what's so wonderful about it. It's so quiet. It's relaxing. So, noise, not a big surprise that could affect, obviously, your ability to maintain or achieve focus. But the other concept is something a little bit different, legibility. Now, the way we measure legibility has to do with if you're in a large building, let's say, and you're trying to navigate your way through it. How quickly can you create a mental map of the layout of the building, or how quickly can you discern the pattern of spaces in the building so that you can make educated guesses as to where things might be? How easily can you see through it, find people, and how well do the spaces and the furnishings communicate their intended use without you having to read a sign that says? So it's not like you walk into a space and it's very obvious that this is a meeting space and it's for formal meetings. So it's sort of the language of the space. How effective is a given space in terms of communicating its usability, its ease of use, and its intended use to you? How well does it speak to you? Okay, so we found over and over that predicted a huge amount of people's ability to focus at work, as well as, less surprisingly, noise levels in the ambient sound environment. So that's the office environment. Now, my advice, and I'm taking my own advice here, if we take that concept of legibility, which I believe is a fundamental human truth that we're finding around the world, and we apply it to the racing environment, I would then say, if you want success, that you need legibility in 2 levels. The first would be make the cockpit of your car a legible space. So that's basic ergonomics. Am I seated correctly? Does my hand fall easily to the shift lever if you have one? Are the instruments the way I've got them designed? Can I scan them easily? Can I reach the switches I need to easily? That's legibility of the micro environment around you. The other aspect of legibility then, I'm just using different language here from just learning the track. How well does the language of that track speak to you? Yeah. How well do you know the track? Do you have such a good mental map of that track in your mind that you can play it in your mind ahead of time before the race? If you don't, then you need to do something to improve the legibility of the quality of your mental map. So these are terms that, these ideas that I've just said obviously have been around. It would be like the ergonomics of the cockpit and learn the track. But I'm trying to tie them back into, this is a cognitive, legibility is a cognitive kind of a real cognitive issue. So if I was going to, I'm taking my own advice here too, if I was going to give advice to a racer, I would say make sure that your cockpit layout, all the instruments, everything I've described are highly legible. You can understand their use, so that doesn't distract you from focus, and then make sure that track is highly legible to you too.
That's really interesting on a number of different levels, and I think most drivers know kind of, and they've been told, your seating position, all that kind of stuff is important, but a very practical thing. I mean, I've seen people make small adjustments to their seating position, or a different steering wheel design, or different seat, or something, or the way the belts mount, something like that, and they're knocking, like, if not many tenths but seconds off their lap times. And you mentioned in the beginning about your laboratory and stuff like that. Obviously the racetrack is this incredible laboratory where laboratories are all about testing things, right? So you try something, and in fact you try something on a racetrack, and a minute and 32.4 seconds later whether it worked or not. So I think that's such a cool way of looking at that. I got to tell you a real quick story. A few weeks ago, I got invited by somebody who works at Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos' rocket company. And I got a invite to go on a tour of the facility and in the Seattle area, and it was mind-boggling how cool it was.
Wow!
But one of the coolest parts of this thing was you walk in, and in the lobby, kind of going up 3 stories, essentially, is, I don't know if it's recreation or whatever, but it's Jules Verne's rocket ship from his stories back in, what was that, late 1800s or early 1900s? I can't remember.
Yeah, 1900s, I think.
Yeah, and you go up to the 2nd floor or 3rd floor, I can't remember which one it is, and you can actually go into it, and they've, it's like you would imagine Jules Verne's rocket ship was, and I can't remember reading those, or I can remember reading that book many years ago. But it's like that. But there are the benches that the rocket flyers at the time would have been sitting on, and they use it as a small meeting room. So.
How cool.
You can imagine, a couple of rocket scientists going in there and going, let's just have a little conversation about whatever, but they're inside Jules Verne's rocket ship. And I just thought it actually made me think of you and the stuff that you were doing with Hayworth and all the, I'm wondering if Hayworth has built Jules Verne's rocket ship for a meeting room yet. So.
Not yet, but that's a great idea.
Yeah. So, you also touched on sound and noise, and obviously driving cars quickly around tracks are, it's not a quiet thing. But I guess, I know many drivers who, if you restrict the sound too much, they actually perform worse. Obviously, if it's too loud, it's distracting. So, does that mean that being in the flow, there is a certain sound that goes with it?
Right. I think in the context of race cars that there's a certain noise level. It's very noisy, And I think if race cars were a situation where they were dead quiet and there were random noises introduced, that would be very harmful.
I mean, like Formula E, the electric cars.
Right. Oh, that motor kicked on. What is that noise?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. So what I think is that you definitely want to get that sensory noise sound information, but you don't need 110 decibels of it either.
Right.
So my specific suggestion would probably to play around with some noise cancellation in your helmet. It's still going to allow you to hear the motor. You need to hear what the motor's doing. You need to hear what the body is doing. And obviously you get the kinesthetics of your motion along with that. So I would never suggest to try to make it completely isolated. But the noise itself, if it's too high of a level, it's very fatiguing and clearly is negatively impacting your ability to maintain focus.
Yeah, and I tell drivers all the time, I mean, I ask them, what ear protection are you using? And, every now and then you get some driver that says, oh, if I try the foamy things or custom molded ones, and they cut out the sound, I couldn't drive as well. Well, I think part of that is just getting used to it. And, I look at any kind of ear protection as simply filtering out the crap and leaving the good stuff there for you.
Exactly. You don't need the noise, you need the sound information. And so I think that, memorize the track, get that legible, set up the interior of your car. And I'm not just talking about, to your point, it's not just comfort, it's beyond comfort, it's actually the layout. Does everything fall to hand? Can I easily scan it? Really think about that. If you have the resources to be able to lay your cockpit out correctly, those two aspects of legibility and then controlling the acoustic environment, I absolutely believe would improve your lap times ultimately. And I'll be finding that out this summer, I guess, because I'll try that.
Well, I can tell you from my experience, you're absolutely dead on right. And it's funny. I mean, we talk about this flow and focus as being this, it's almost some mystical kind of thing. And yet, sometimes it comes down to some pretty basic stuff, right?
Right. Absolutely.
And, I guess that it doesn't matter what workspace somebody's working in. Same things kind of apply.
Right. They do. Because if you think about it, as I said at the outset, all of those activities, whether it's as diverse as driving a race car to working on a difficult problem at work, it's knowledge work in a sense. It's human cognition and knowledge work, and we all seem that, at least at this point, we all share that same basic wiring. Although some people are better at some things than others.
And I guess maybe that's the last point we'll sort of talk about today is just that what works for you may not be entirely what works for me.
Right.
And obviously, that's the challenge of. I mean, it's the challenge that any workspace designer has, right? I mean, Porsche or whoever, they build a car that fits and works with most people, but there are some people that it doesn't work for. And I'm sure it's the same thing with you at Hayworth and workspaces and stuff like that. You're building for the majority of people and trying to get as many people into that performance state of mind, but
right, absolutely right.
Yeah.
We look at things like organizational culture and different generations at work, and there's it's human beings and it's organizations. There's a lot at play, and so definitely in today's office, you see a wider variety of spaces, so people and more choice, so people can find the place that works for them.
Yeah.
And maybe we apply that to auto racing and giving drivers more control over their cars, inside their cars with technology.
Yeah. Well, this is very cool, and so you gave some great practical advice, but I think we can just wrap it up and just say, well, go out there and get into the flow, right?
Oh, right. Go ahead. Good luck.
Yeah. So, Mike, what if people want to find out more about what you're doing, is there something where they can look at or find something that you're doing, or just follow along with what you're doing with your racing, or?
Sure, absolutely. If you're interested in these topics, as well as maybe a little bit of my racing, you can look me up on LinkedIn, Mike O'Neill, Hayworth. You'll find me. My Twitter handle is ask_Dr. Mike, all one word. Again, you can find me there. And I regularly do publish things through both of those outlets. So if you're on one or the other, you'll find me.
Okay, cool. And I'll put links to those in the show notes so people can find them. Yeah.
Great. And I do want to give just a thank you to the Hayworth family for supporting our research. Mabel Casey, my boss, the VP of Marketing, Michael Warsaw, and Paul Nemshoff, both car enthusiasts, and I've had a lot of really helpful conversations with all of them on this.
That's cool. That I'll share the when you first asked me about coming and talking with your group and stuff, and I was like, what? Furniture designers do research? I thought they just design cool chairs, And I think that's what the average person thinks. But you're right. I mean, to allow you to do that kind of research and really focus on what helps people get into flow and perform better. I mean, that's pretty darn cool. So,
right.
I guess in some ways, lucky you.
Yeah, I feel very fortunate.
Yeah.
And Ross, I have to say it has been a privilege getting to know you and working with you in the last year.
Yeah, same. And we've got a couple of little projects we're continuing to work on, so that'll be fun.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. And as always, keep having fun.
All right. Thanks, Ross.
Here's this week's Speed Secret, today's tip. If it seems you're not improving, you're about to. Nobody learns anything in a linear manner, whether it's driving a car or playing the piano. We learn in steps. We consciously practice something, we get better at it, and eventually it becomes something we don't have to think about. It's become part of our subconscious programming. It's at this point where the brain seems to need to solidify the new skill or information for a while, and we feel like we're on a plateau, not improving. If we don't get frustrated at this point, eventually we'll have another burst of learning. But if we get frustrated because we're not improving, we try harder and actually perform worse. So relax, be patient, and understand that after every plateau is another burst of learning. Sometimes you just need to wait a little for that to happen. Accept that as a human, you're going to learn in steps, and that means there will be plateaus every now and then. Talking with Dr. Mike O'Neill today was so much fun for me. Getting into flow or the zone is a topic I've studied for so long and helped drivers with for years. In fact, it's the focus, no pun intended, of my Inner Speed Secrets 201 e-course. There's no doubt that using the e-course will help you get into the zone or flow more often. And who doesn't want that? So go to learn.speedsecrets.com to learn how to get into flow. Hey, thanks for listening to this week's Speed Secrets podcast. And if you could do me a favor and leave a review, I'd really appreciate it. Keep learning and having fun.